Welcome to the Spectators Podcast. Here are your hosts, Corey and Jeff.
Welcome, spectators, to another episode of the Spectators Podcast, episode 27. We are getting so close to 30, which is exciting. So my name is Jeff, and to my mic adjacent back home in the beautiful province of British Columbia with another Vegas Golden Knights hat is Corey. Corey, how are you?
I'm good. I've been home for just a few days, and as you know, I've been scrambling to get everything set up and ready so that we could do this podcast, as we did have a couple of days delay from our last one. But I'm excited to be back home. I feel like it's really hot here, though, and it's hotter here than it was back in Saskatoon because of what I was reading, upwards of 60% humidity with the 30 plus degree weather. So how are you, though? How have things been?
Well, I'm getting used as you can to 30 plus degree heat with the humidity. Thank you. We live in a rainforest, so I probably shouldn't complain. It rains most of the time, so we get 2 months of hot weather and we all complain. So that's typical BC attitude.
Oh, for sure. But I do believe it's a weird thing that I've noticed is we never had heat like this, like consistent 30 plus degree high humidity weather, and it's just getting worse and worse every year. I know last year was a big year with like plus 40 some days, but this year still seems like it's been as hot or close to it at least.
No, it definitely has been a hot summer for sure. A bit more longer in heat than it was last year. Last year we had those spurts of heat.
I think if I was here, I would have had my hot boy summer.
Yeah, no, you think your beard would have been blonde from all the sun exposure.
Yeah.
Your beautiful beard. But speaking of hot, here comes Jeff's transitions. You and I have now been getting into Marvel, as we discussed a few episodes ago, and surprisingly, you and I are caught up now on the Marvel series, and we're talking about She-Hulk. So that just came out last week. You actually were able to watch it before me, surprisingly. Usually I'm way ahead of you on that. So I did want to take some time to discuss this new film, because I think what's exciting is that it's a bit different now because it's actually going to be 9 episodes. We haven't seen a 9-episode series since WandaVision, and I think maybe Falcon and Winter Soldier. But yeah, so what were your thoughts on episode 1 of She-Hulk?
Did you also catch episode 2? Just checking.
Oh, have I missed episode 2?
You must have missed episode 2. It just came out this past Thursday, so I won't give you any spoilers. But let's talk about episode 1. I just want to make sure so I don't spoil anything for you. And
my days are so messed up. I forgot that it's episode 2 is already out. So
it is relatively new, so I don't want to spoil anything for viewers or listeners right now either. Episode 1 was good. I'll say some of the takeaways that I really liked about the plot, really. The whole plot of it. I liked how I'm always a sucker for when there's situations where the lead cast speaks to the camera and speaks directly to the audience, and I really liked that take of it. I think it gives you that funny vibe, funny humor side of it, and I'm really glad they could bring in Hulk. Mark Ruffalo, right? I'm happy that they could actually bring him into the show, have him. He had a significant portion of the first episode, which is good. I would think that he's probably not going to be in the show all that much, maybe like spurts every episode or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it seems like a fun twist on the Hulk perspective. Like we think of Hulk as like such a angry, uncontrollable mess, and she seemingly was able to just control it right off the get-go, and I think that's really cool. There's so much I want to talk about episode 2, but I won't, I won't give it away. But one of the things that was really nasty was that part where they get in the accident and then you see her blood his blood go into her cut. And it's like, if you think about that in real, like for real, that's pretty gross, but it makes complete sense for what happened there. And yeah, I mean, what's your perspective? Like, you've seen all the shows so far, right? You've seen everything. I think there's still a couple that I haven't seen, but like, how do you feel about it? And two, like, how would you rate the first episode as a pilot episode in comparison to some of the others out of let's say 5?
I think because this one's 9 episodes, it's definitely it was a great first episode, but it's not as slow as WandaVision was. Like WandaVision took some serious time to get going, and then ended up in spectacular fashion. But I think for me, what I took away from episode 1 is that they're really starting to show they're moving in a different trajectory when it comes to this new age, right? Because you saw, what is She-Hulk's character's name? I can't even remember the character's name. Anyways, his cousin, who's now She-Hulk, or, the new Hulk, right? Because she's younger, it looks like, than Bruce Banner. But I see similarities from what we saw with Kamala Khan in Ms. Marvel, in that, like, you can be a superhero in a different way where it doesn't completely destroy your life, right? Because, in the first episode, Bruce is like, your life has changed. You're a superhero now. You're going to have to drop everything. You're just going to have to live basically in solidarity,
basically,
with him in Mexico, right? But she's like, you know what? No, I'm gonna figure this out, and then I'm gonna go back and be a lawyer. And the end of episode 1 was fantastic, where she, turns into She-Hulk, knocks that person out, and then wants to, finish her closing statement, which I thought was fantastic. And I wish I would have watched it. I didn't realize, for some reason I thought it was this Thursday coming up was episode 2.
This Thursday will be episode 3 now. Yeah,
I'm a week behind somehow.
That's okay.
Probably watching too much WWE.
But hey, you brought up a really good point that I just want to say. I just want to go off of here. I think you know something really cool about the way that Marvel's kind of going in this direction is that you mentioned it in Miss Marvel, and it's living your life differently as a superhero. And what we think of like a superhero is like hidden identity, right? Like like always, there's always like a hidden identity and like a secret identity. We saw it with Spider-Man. We've seen it with Iron Man until he told everyone. But we've seen it with everybody really. And then now, Ms. Marvel, like, she was open with her family. She told her family about it. Her family knows about it. And with this show, like, everybody is quite familiar with it too. So I think that's the direction that is interesting. You're seeing, people be more open to talking about it and wanting to live their life while not just being like I'm a superhero and that's my identity, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I thought it was fascinating too in the first episode where, like, I mean, she masters being a Hulk pretty quick, right? But what I found interesting was that, one of Bruce Banner's biggest thing was that he was fighting the Hulk persona and his persona, right? And that's actually why I believe in, it was Infinity War? No, Endgame, right? Where he, like, Hulk wouldn't come out? Was that the start of Endgame?
I think so.
No.
Yeah.
It was Infinity War.
It was Infinity War, yeah.
Right, so like he said, basically for 10 years he was fighting these two personas, and that never happened with his cousin. I will learn the character's name.
Jennifer Walters is her name.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Jennifer gets it right away. So I thought that was also fascinating, and I think it's just maybe she was just really kind of accepting of her circumstance. Was almost immediately ready to. Like, of course, when she first got infected by Bruce, she obviously didn't know what the heck was going on, so that's why she was fighting all those guys in the bar.
And she turned right away, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But then when she finally had an understanding of what was going on, she was able to pretty much just basically move on. And I did really enjoy the Hulk fight. That was quite hilarious. And they destroyed the bar.
Yeah, I agree with that. That was hilarious.
And then they built the bar back, which I think was pretty fun.
Just tying up the tikis and the roof and everything. I think it probably just goes to show you, like, they talk about composure, right? He talks about composure, being able to hold your composure. And like, you think about her and her life, and she's a lawyer, right? You have to hold your composure in so many different ways. You can't really be angry in court. So maybe those kind of things, and we'll probably hear more about it in different episodes, but those kind of things probably tied into her being able to control it by not having as much anger, where Bruce, on the other hand, has a lot of pent-up anger and frustration, and like, he worked a job where even when he was a scientist, he's more in solidarity, so he's used to that lifestyle. So he's got a lot of pent-up anger and doesn't vent it out, or have to stay composed for his job necessarily. So I think maybe that's part of why she was able to just like master it so quickly.
Yeah, no, and if I saw episode 2, I would have a bit more of a sense on where they're taking it, right? But I'm really kind of curious where they're going to take it, especially with the 9 episodes. I imagine they're going to build in a little more, because it goes She-Hulk, and then I think it's Wakanda Forever, and then this is the end of Phase 4. So I'm really kind of curious, is anybody else going to be because they had Carol Danvers show up at the end of Ms. Marvel, so we saw her, and obviously we don't know where Ms. Marvel is now. She's in some sort of dimension, so they gotta go find her, right? So I'm really kind of curious, with this being the second to last project before the end of Phase 4, what's going to happen, who's going to be introduced, because I just realized, I didn't know this, Ironheart, who they're going to be introducing in the next phase, is actually going to be in Wakanda Forever.
Is that right?
Yeah, I just read that, and which makes sense to me, because I guess they're going to need her help to fight whatever battle they're going to fight in that film, and obviously they're going to reintroduce her so that she can have her own show, and I think it's Phase 5. They're going to introduce Ironheart, so I am really curious where they're going to take this moving forward, because there's so many different directions, right? And like, I think in the next phase, we're gonna see Kang again. He's gonna be in the Ant-Man and Wasp, Quadamatala, I think it's how you say it.
I think so.
But we're also, you and I are missing Thor too, and what was in that one. I'm aware of one cameo at the end, but I think that's more of continuing the Thor story than it is the overall story of the MCU. But there's a few things that I'm really curious about too, that's sort of lingering from this phase, and one of them is from Shang-Chi, when they the end credits, when they said that his rings were a beacon of some sort.
Yes.
So they haven't, and Bruce and Carol Danvers were there talking with Wong about what that was, and it was really confusing to them. So I'm really curious. Like, that's one thing that's sort of still unanswered.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because I haven't seen another Shang-Chi mentioned in their plans moving forward, so he's obviously going to have to come back at some point.
He will definitely come back, because I think he'll be part of both the Secret Wars and the Kong Dynasty movies. They'll probably do a second movie, because at the end of the movie you could see him and his sister work together through a lot of the movie, but you could see that his sister's touted to be the next villain. Clearly, they made that pretty obvious at the end of the movie. So I think they have story to work with there. So they'll probably do something and maybe announce it at some point before the 2 Avengers movies coming out, I would think. But maybe it'll be after the Avengers movies. Who knows?
Yeah, it'd be really interesting where they're going to go. Because the other thing I'm really curious about too is, two things I'm curious about is, one is where is Wanda going to fit in back?
Yeah.
And I know we kind of discussed it at length the last time we talked about Marvel, but the other thing I'm really curious about is like, where is White Vision going to fit in this too? Like, why introduce such a significant character if he's not going to come back? And Marvel doesn't just introduce these kind of characters and not have them come back, and in what capacity, right? Because at the end of WandaVision, he did get his memories from the other Vision, but it wasn't really clear like what that was going to result in for White Vision, because like, he was created to destroy Wanda, right? By, I can't remember the name of that. I think whatever damage control I think they're called now, but I don't know if it's a similar thing. Anyways, but then he got those memories from Vision, and then he just disappeared. So I'm really curious where he's going to fit in moving forward. You imagine he will also be involved in Secret. I mean, they're going to need everybody for the Kang Dynasty, right?
Yeah.
So it's just interesting how they're going to fold everything in, right? While also introducing all these new. They're rebooting Fantastic Four.
Yep.
They're finishing off
again.
Ant-Man. Yeah, third time around, as we discussed in the last podcast. But Yeah, no. So like She-Hulk's gonna be really interesting. I'm really kind of curious where they're gonna take it. It's another project where what I'm liking is there is the 9 episodes, so I think there's gonna be a bit more significance. Like WandaVision was longer, and then it folded into Doctor Strange, right? They gave that
Yeah.
one a bit longer of a run. And I think they also gave Captain America around 8 episodes too. I could be wrong. No, I think it was 6. Anyways, Captain America's getting their own movie, right? So I'm kind of curious what they're gonna do with this storyline and how they're gonna move it forward, especially with Bruce Banner still kind of being involved. It looks like he still has his Hulk powers, so he's
Right.
able to be because like the new Avengers are going to need some mentors, right? Like they
Yeah.
can't just go
I was
off
thinking
and
about that. I was like, well, he's still involved, and in some way, he's still very powerful. So it only makes
yeah.
sense. Like you said, they need all hands on deck. So it makes sense for him to be in the new Avengers movies as well.
Yeah, well, they're gonna need some Hawkeye's still there, right? So he can be a mentor to
Ant
the
Man
new
will
event.
probably still be around. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how much of a mentor he can really be though, because like his character is a bit different, and he's not really like a leader. I guess so.
Yeah.
Like in Endgame, he came and gave the idea of the quantum realm and how to jump between timelines or jump through time, right? Um, but I wouldn't really consider him being like someone who can like lead the next wave of Avengers, right?
Right.
He's more of he kind of does his own thing as you've seen in there, and obviously the Guardians they're out in space, so they can't really help the new Avengers, right? So you have to find some Earth-based veterans, right? I mean, T'Challa could have been one of those too, but obviously, unfortunately, he's not going to be a part of this. So I'm wondering who is going to be the people that could sort of. I mean, if you think about it, there was no one to mentor Tony Stark and Captain America and Rogers, they kind of just built the Avengers themselves. I guess, mind you, what's his name? Nick Fury
Nick
kind of
Fury
did it.
kind of led that group,
Sort
right?
a little bit in some contention, right? But so who? Yeah, I like with all these young folks when they do to come together, they're gonna be inexperienced, right? I mean, like you saw basically how like Hawkeye trained Kate Bishop a little bit, right? So, um, I think Bruce was wanting to mentor his cousin, but she seemed to do pretty good and is off on her own. And I'm missing some information obviously because I haven't seen episode 2 yet. But yeah, I'm really fascinated to see how this new wave of hero is going to potentially face a bigger threat than Thanos. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Thanos did win. He did win, right? He did get the snap. He did eliminate half the universe. And then they ended up jumping through and correcting it, right? And actually, essentially, Endgame was they fought Thanos twice. Like, they fought Thanos in Infinity War and lost, and then they jumped time and then fought him again. And then we're able to defeat him with the Infinity
we
Stones.
we could see a similar path with Kang, like something happens and they're able to kind of redeem themselves because Marvel tends to do a good job with that, where they kind of have a redemption story. So we'll
Yeah.
see, we'll see.
Well, what was Secret Wars in the comics?
Well,
Do you remember?
I'm trying to remember like back what happened. I know but like trying to think of like who the main person that they're fighting is, and if it is Kang or not. But I know there's like there are heroes from like all over the place that are brought into it. So like Fantastic Four would have been in it.
X-Men.
Spider-Man, X-Men, like everybody's involved as much as they can be. But I'm just trying to think of who it was that they were fighting. I don't recall at this point. It's been a long time since I've read the comic book, but regardless, I know it'll be just as big battle as it was with Thanos, if not more.
You imagine that if they stick to the same kind of story, like they'll defeat Kang potentially in Kang Dynasty, or like it'll be kind of unknown.
Yeah.
And then maybe Secret Wars they kind of finish the job, right? Because he did mention in Loki Kang that he had multiple different versions of himself, and maybe Kang Dynasty is just him. Like maybe the Avengers are trying to stop him from merging all himselves, and then he ends up achieving it, and then in Secret Wars they have to stop this ultra powerful Kang.
Yeah,
But,
that's right.
yeah. we're gonna see him in Ant-Man 3, so I'm really kind of excited to see what that looks like. But yeah, no, very excited. I wanted to touch on some Marvel because it's still very relevant and exciting. And again, you and I are stuck in being relevant in order, so we have to wait each week.
We have to wait. We have to wait each week. That's for sure. And it's not always fun to wait. But then you do have a little bit more anticipation built rather than binge watching everything. Right. From my experience. Just a quick transition over to another universe, which is the DC universe. I'm curious if you have dabbled into that side of things before, if you've watched any of those movies. My partner and I have just watched the Peacemaker show with John Cena.
With John Cena?
Yeah. And we were gonna watch it, and in the first episode, it's basically like previously during the Suicide Squad, and I'm like, oh man, so we had to stop it and we went and watched the Suicide Squad, the second one. So you know how they had like the one with Jared Leto and he was Joker? It was awful. It was really bad. I don't know if you've seen it, but then they re-released it and they called it the Suicide Squad. John Cena was part of that movie, and then they released a show called Peacemaker, which is around his character specifically. I think it was 8 episodes. And it was a little hard to get into for the first 2 episodes, but I definitely recommend watching it if you're looking for like a totally different feel and storyline, because DC's a little bit more vulgar, gory than it would be Marvel. But it was really good. Like John Cena's acting was really funny, and there's a lot of humor in it. At first I was like not sure. I almost stopped watching it, but then after I got past the 2-3 episodes, I was like, it ended up becoming really good. And I think they're set for a second season. So if you're looking for something else to watch, definitely something I'd recommend.
Did he give anybody an attitude adjustment? Is my question.
No, he didn't. I was like waiting for it during the whole show. I was like, is he going to do it? Unless there's something I missed. But yeah, no, he got in fights and stuff, but no wrestling moves that I could see. Unfortunately, it's disappointing.
It's like when George St. Pierre was Bardock in Captain America. I was just like, oh my god, it's JSP. His acting is, he's a UFC fighter, so I mean, you can't expect him to act that greatly. And he actually was in he came back for Falcon Winter Soldier as well. He was the main villain, one of the main villains. So it's always nice when you get to see some of your favorite fighters or and I mean, like I didn't watch The Rock when he was in WWE. I just really got to know him through his acting. Through, the first movie I saw, what was that movie? Anyways,
The Scorpion King probably was the one you saw.
No,
maybe.
It's with
Walking Tall, Gridiron Gang, Tooth Fairy.
It was a comedy. It it's with John Travolta. It's
Be Cool.
Yes, thank you.
I love The Rock, so like I know most of his movies. I mean, I watched him a little bit after he debuted, so I don't really recall, at least memory-wise, I don't recall him much when he was like Rocky Maivia. But after that, I do remember when he was part of the Nation of Domination with Farouk and them, and he was finally changed his name to The Rock. So I saw him progress in his wrestling career, and then I do remember he was doing really well, and he was such a fan favorite. And then all of a sudden, he went out and started doing Hollywood. He did Scorpion King. He was in The Mummy Returns, I think, and that's where he first had the Scorpion King.
As Scorpion King.
And then he had his full movie on its own, which was awesome. But then you kind of thought, hey, he's probably going to do movies like that, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. But then he starts dabbling into comedy and other things like this, and I honestly think he's one of the best actors in the world. And it shows based on his yearly salary and like how well he is in movies. He usually has pretty high box office numbers too, but we see a lot of this like with wrestlers, like they do have a good transition into movies pretty good.
Well, he's a bit of an exception, don't you think? Like I think of other wrestlers, and maybe you don't see a lot of UFC guys actually go into, or women go into
Ronda Rousey
acting. Yeah, well, we know a anyways, but let's not dive into Ronda right now. She's currently arrested. And anyways, I was actually, it's funny you brought up The Rock, because I was just thinking about how actually incredible it has been for him, and the fact that he went into wrestling like most as we see most wrestling families, we do see them join it, right? We got the Usos and Roman, right? That
All part of
Usos
his family, yeah.
The Usos' brother is also NXT,
Yeah.
so like the family's there, right?
And
he was
Uso's
able to,
dad
like,
and everyone there
right,
too.
yes, of
Yeah,
course.
Uso's dad, yeah, Rikishi.
So like that family moved into wrestling, and for the most part, they're in wrestling, right?
Yes.
And like we've seen other wrestlers go into movies, right? We see John Cena. There's a few, I can't think.
I think Triple H has been in like Blade,
Yeah.
Stone Cold.
Right,
I think
he
has
was
been
in
he Blade 3 or
was.
something like that.
Stone Cold was
Cold
in
dabbled in
the Adam Sandler movie,
not
The
the
Longest Yard.
Oh yeah, Longest Yard, and he was also in what's the one with Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger? They have the big group
The
of
Expendables.
The Expendables. He was in one of those.
So you see wrestlers like do sort of spotty stuff, but you look at him and like Dwayne Johnson or The Rock.
He stars and stuff.
And like he really like made his name, right? Like he took the wrestling persona and just turned it into something like basically an empire. If you think about it, I mean, he's so wealthy now that there was rumors he was gonna buy WWE.
Yeah,
it's a multi-billion-dollar company, right? You can't say
he owns the XFL too. He bought that out.
So I thought that was fantastic. It's just really interesting to see someone like take that name. Like, I mean, the guy was in. I think it was also he tried out for the Calgary Stampeders and he got cut. Right? That's just kind of.
He had a good what do you call it? He had a good college career, and he was touted to be drafted in the NFL. And I think he went undrafted, and then he started playing for the Stampeders, and I think he got cut after one game, I believe.
Yeah.
And then he actually has a really good show on HBO. I don't know if you've ever seen it, called Ballers, and it's all kind of like similar to like what his experience was in football. Yeah.
So I think it's I think it's really amazing that someone that just like, because I mean Cena talked a little bit that like he owes so much to WWE because they gave him his name and things like that, but you don't really hear that from The Rock. But he like took his name, he took the fandom that he got from the WWE and turned it into this empire. He's got a clothing brand. He's in countless.
He's got a tequila brand. Terramana tequila, yeah. He's got an energy drink brand, I think, too.
Energy
I think he owns a production company now, too. He has like $7 Productions, yeah. So he produces a lot of his own movies.
He's in a lot of films. He's a part owner of the XFL, which almost at one point actually merged with the CFL. It was during the pandemic where the CFL was actually pretty close to doing it. And I think the XFL is actually getting ready to actually do it. To get going here, right, and actually be a competitor for the NFL.
I think they start this season.
Really fascinating to see. So Dwayne is a really interesting story, and I'm looking forward to, when he retires or something like that, looking to just hear about his legacy, right, and see just his story. I know that I did read about a story where he's married now, but has an ex-wife which he had kids with, right?
Yes. I believe that's where his daughter, that's currently in NXT, is with his previous wife. Yeah.
Yeah, and that previous wife actually was his manager, and it's a fascinating story where they were coming to the end of their marriage. He said to her, like, you know what? I know this isn't going to work out, but like I'm close to becoming something very big, and that's going to benefit you and me. So even though we're getting divorced, like stay as my manager, push me. And it'll be successful, and he was right. Like look where he is now, and I'm sure she made a ton of money off of being his manager, right? I'm sure they not that relationship anymore, but I think that's really interesting that like your soon to be ex-wife is going to be your manager, and you were like, well, I know this isn't working out like our relationship, but like business wise, let's stick this out and see how it works, and ended up working out for them great. So I thought that was a tremendous story.
He's just done such wonderful things. Like you're right. He really took like what he had in the WWE and his fandom and everything. They followed him, and like everybody still thinks like a lot of his fans are still probably WWE fans, but like just what he's done in terms of creating an empire. And I think he had 1 to maybe 3 years as top paid actor in Hollywood. Like that's insane. He's a billionaire now, actually. I think he is up to the billions now. But I think John Cena's more so at that almost beginning stages. He's a little past beginning stages, but not he's nowhere near what The Rock is. He hasn't put the time in, but I think that's where he wants to be, is remain in movies, because I think he understands his body can't go through he's 45. He talked about it this year. He can't go through WWE as long. So he's making a name for himself, and his acting's great. I think he's hilarious. I think he really brings a lot of like his own touch to it. And man, I think it'd be crazy to see the two of them in a movie together, to be honest.
Yeah, that'd be cool down the road.
I know they've both been in Fast and Furious, so I mean, just saying.
I didn't know that. Cena was in Fast and Furious too.
So The Rock was in Fast 5 and so on from there, and I think the last Fast, so Fast 9, whatever number they're on, I think 9.
F9.
That's where Cena was in that. He actually played Dom's brother. I haven't seen it yet, but yeah, he plays Dom's brother, who they talked about in the past, but no one ever played him before, so he never showed up in this movie.
I stopped at Fast 3.
Okay, it's a really good series. It's one of my favorite series, so yeah, I love it. I just haven't seen the most recent one.
It's hard for me to go past 3 with a. I guess I can't say that I'm a Harry Potter person, so I guess I can't say it's a no. But I'm even watching the Fantastic Beasts series. So I guess I can't criticize folks for watching something like that. It reminds me of remember the old movies Land Before Time. Did you ever watch those?
I love Land Before Time. Yeah,
they have like 1,000 of them.
They have 1,000 of them.
Time 10 or something like that, and it's just like this is just.
But the original ones, I loved them when I was a kid. Yeah.
No, they were really good for sure. But yeah, no, and. One thing I did want to, so changing topics, because I noticed you are wearing a Vegas Golden Knights hat.
Yes.
I did want to chat about a hot dog Phil. Vegas Golden Knights signed Phil Kessel to a 1-year, $1.5 million contract.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's pretty easy to tell. I think you'll agree here, Jeff. With Vegas signing Mr. Hot Dog Phil Kessel, they're clearly going to take the number 1 spot in the Pacific now. It's undeniable that they're going to be the best team in the Pacific just because of the signing. So, but no, in in reality, I think it was an interesting deal. Like when I heard about it, my partner is a really big fan of Phil Kessel, and when she told me about it, she was really excited. You're never going to guess who they signed. You're never going to guess who they signed. And I couldn't. I named off a couple names and I couldn't think about it. And then she's like, "It's Phil Kessel," and I was like, "Where did that come from?" I wasn't expecting that out of anywhere. And I think they got him for a pretty good deal. I think they're only paying them like 1.25, 1.5, and yeah, that's fair. I mean, he brings good experience, and he's going to be a veteran in the room with experience on a few teams. So I think that's not a bad thing. I don't know how they'll utilize him, to be honest, but he'll probably be like a second or maybe a third line.
Probably power play guy too.
Power play guy, yeah.
Well, it's just interesting because you had him sign for 1.5, and Paul Stastny also signed in Carolina for the same deal. So it's interesting to see, because those are two guys that were sort of lingering right after Kadri signed. There was a few guys. There was him. There's still guys like Evan Rodriguez and Zach Aston Reese, and there's also Sonny Milano. Yeah, Sonny Milano. So 3 guys that I think, if not for the salary cap crunch, would have probably been signed by their teams already. But because of the salary cap crunch and the flat cap in the NHL, I think it's really that we're seeing a lot more of this. Right, there were a lot of RFAs that got. Chicago is a bit of an outlier. And let a few guys go, but that was more their philosophy more than a salary cap dump or salary cap crunch, and they couldn't re-sign these guys. So, at some point these guys were going to find teams. It was just really interesting to see that. I thought Vegas was pretty solid on their forward group.
Yeah.
So I thought I didn't even think they would be getting a forward, like maybe a defenseman, but there's also not a lot of good defensemen left, right? And you criticize Phil as much as you want for the jokes like hot dogs and things like that. Like the guy can still score.
He can.
You can't look at his record really with Arizona last year, because really they were trying to suck, right? Like, so, and Phil's not necessarily a guy who's gonna stand up in the locker room and rally the troops. Like, he's definitely a guy that we'll just go with what's going on in the room, right? That's why they brought him in. That's why Jim Rutherford brought him to Pittsburgh, right? Because he knew that in a strong room, he's a really good guy, right? Like, he'll follow along and play well with a Malkin, right? And I think actually he didn't even play with Malkin or Crosby. He played with Nick Bonino and Carl Hagelin, right? So
Played well
a
with them,
really
actually.
good-
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they won 2 cups, right? So I think he, like you said, I think he's going to be a really good veteran. I think he's going to be a power play guy for Vegas. And I think the fans are really going to like him. He's just a cool, down to earth guy. I think he's a good PR signing too for Vegas, right? And there's a lot of pressure on this team this year, like a lot of pressure. Because if they don't make the playoffs again, I think that's going to be a good night for him. I was gonna say Pat McAfee, but that is not the G. That is not the,
You're saying George
George
McPhee.
Thank
Pat
you.
McAfee. Too much wrestling on your brain.
Well, Clash is coming next week, so they've been very, and of course it's summer, it's the off season,
Yeah.
so my brain is WWE right now. But I mean, when September hits next with all the training camps, I'll be back into NHL brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, George McPhee and George McCrimmon.
Kelly McCrimmon.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I'll get it. It's not, everyone's just George in my brain.
Everyone's just George.
Yeah, you're now George, Corey.
Okay,
You're
sounds
not
good.
Corey anymore. Yeah, I think sir, like a lot of jobs will be lost. I don't know
Right.
if Bruce Cassidy will get fired if they don't go, right? But I mean, like on the flip side, like they're gonna go in with Logan Thompson and Laurent Bossois, right? So can you really blame that? Oh, actually, you probably can. You can't blame Bruce because Bruce Cassidy was brought in to coach this team. You can absolutely blame George McPhee and I'm just gonna say it, George. McCrimmon, for not getting a goalie, right? So I mean, the thing is it's hard because they can't they can only sign a guy like Phil Kessel because they have Leonard now on LTIR, right? And they got a lot of guys on LTIR, including Shea Weber, right? So that does get them about 11 million above the cap. But you, like, if you're an owner like Bill Foley, you won't be paying $11 million basically for someone not to play on your team. That's a lot of money, right? That's like that's an entire third and fourth line for an NHL team in some instances, right? So if you're paying that much for them not to play for you, you do want to see results, right? And they made their choices, right? They went and got Pietrangelo, they went and got Mark Stone. These are really good players, and they made that bet on Robin Lehner, right? And it showed signs of it, right? But now you're in a spot where because they don't have any draft picks, because they haven't really been focusing on scouting, they don't really have a goalie, right? We'll see. Thompson did show some flares.
Yep.
In his season, but he's unproven, right?
Still think he needs development, to be honest. I don't think he's not there yet. He's only played less than 30 games in the NHL, I think, somewhere around there.
So it would be really tough for him, right? And if you're Vegas, what do you trade, right? You have to trade a guy off your roster, which would make your team weaker, right? Because I know Varlamov's available out of New York. Potential. Well, yeah, he is because Ilya Sorokin really showed up last season. There's a guy like who's available, like Varlamov, but you got to pay for him, right? They don't really have any draft picks to trade. They've traded basically all of their prospects, including the guy they traded it away for, Max Pacioretty, who's now ironically on LTIR. So Vegas is in a real tough spot where it's basically playoffs or bust, and I don't even know if playoffs is the bar anymore, right? I think playoffs is the start.
I think they got to win a cup. Like they've had a lot of good playoff experience. The first year they went to the cup final. Every year after that they made the conference final, and then last year was the first year they actually didn't even make the playoffs, right? So I think they can't look at a success making the playoffs. I don't think that can be listed as a success. They don't have many years left with these players. They've got a lot of players that you mentioned are signed to high contracts that if they want to acquire anyone, they're going to have to trade one of these good guys, which is going to make their team a lot weaker. And they're stuck with a few long-term deals that aren't necessarily the best for them. Speaking
they're not
of
age well, that's for sure.
Like the Pietrangelo deal and the Eichel deal definitely aren't. I don't think either of them will age well because Eichel signed for another 8 years or something, 7 years, something like that.
That's 6 years left on the
6 years, okay. Yeah. So
we'll see. I mean, like Eichel did get a year to rest, right? But it was a serious back surgery, so that could.
He's still young too.
Yeah, he is, right. Him and McDavid are the same age, right? Which believe it or not, Connor McDavid's 26. believe it or not, which is
I
crazy.
can't believe he's already 26.
Yeah, 2015 was the draft, so he would have been
Yeah.
18. So whatever the math is, you're the math guy of the podcast, so I'll leave the math to you. But yeah, no, like Vegas is in a real tough spot in the Pacific, right? Like managerial wise, right? Like, I think they're still a good team, and they're one of those teams that, like, if they didn't make the playoffs, they're gonna get a higher draft pick, right? Sorry, like lower draft pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're gonna be stuck in that awkward middle, right? And for them, like they don't really need, like they need high end prospects. Like they need a Bedard, they need a Mitchkov, they need a Fantilli. Like though the guys that are at the top 3 of the draft in 2023, they need someone like that badly in their prospect pool because they just don't have it. They got a few college guys that they drafted, and they've signed a few prospects which are promising, but like not in a sense that like if things start to go badly, right? In the next couple of years, they have there's not a lot of hope for the future, right? Like they're in that Pittsburgh, Calgary Flames kind of category where they've got all this talent right now, and they got to push to win, and if they don't, they're in trouble. Like they're in serious trouble. Now, Vegas, I think, has a few. Like I think they could probably get in the next couple of years if they're smart. They could probably get a good package for Pietrangelo because he's a right-handed defenseman, and those guys, our teams are clamoring for someone like a Pietrangelo. I think they probably could get a good deal for Mark Stone, depending on Mark Stone's been injured a lot, so I don't know how much you could get, and you probably have to do some retention on salary. But on the flip side, you need to have an ownership and management group that's willing to accept those kind of deals, right, and accept the fact that they will probably not be very good. Because unfortunately, you can only do this for so long, right? Like look at Detroit, right? Detroit did make the playoffs for what, 19 years in a row, or something like that.
Yeah.
And look where they are now. Now they're doing it by choice, right? But that's because the Irishman came in and said, yeah, you know what? Time to tear it down. It's time to suck because we've had 19 years of playoffs, getting into the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Nashville's kind of a bit of an outlier too, but at some point they are going to run out, right? Look at San Jose. That's another example too.
Yeah.
Right? Like they pushed every single year to get into the playoffs, and now they're in this awkward middle. They got rid of Burns, so that was a good move. I was actually a bit surprised that was allowed because I know the ownership there, from what I've read and heard, is not in favor at all of a rebuild because they put all this money into Carlson at that time, Burns, right? Like they don't want to lose, which is interesting because if you look at California, right? LA is really the only team that's kind of, LA and Anaheim. Anaheim's on the upswing. LA is definitely a bit further ahead of schedule than we thought. So, if San Jose played it smart, they could have been on that same trajectory, right? Because I'm sure they're concerned. I don't know how big California is, but I'm sure they're probably concerned about losing fans to the other 2 California teams.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
It's one of the rare things that you would see with having 3 teams in one state, right? Again, I don't know the distance, so maybe I could be completely off, and those cities are very far apart from each other, and that isn't a concern. But when you just try to strive to stay competitive and not get ahead of this, like it can be trouble. It can be trouble all the other way too if you try to do it Edmonton or a Buffalo, which I think Buffalo has been cursed by the hockey gods for blatantly tanking to try and get McDavid. They haven't made the playoffs since 2015.
2015, right?
Or 2014, sorry, because they sucked the year after to try and get McDavid. So it's a real interesting balance, right? And so I'll be very curious to see these teams that are pushing for contention, like Calgary and Vegas, right? If you look at Philadelphia too, like they're sort of denying where they're at as well, and I mean, like they're at a point where they're denying where they're at, that they filled up their cap space, that they couldn't sign a guy like Johnny Gaudreau, who I heard and read was willing to take less to go home, but because they were so capped out, they couldn't do it, right? So sometimes, like I think you see in the NHL, you have impatient ownership, which then hires. Well, I mean, look at Jim Benning, for example, right? When you're in Vancouver, you have impatient ownership that hires impatient general managers to try to push a process forward that if you do it correctly, you can see long-term success. Like I think Carolina is a good example of that, right? Like yes, they haven't won a cup, but if you look at how they're structured, they were a potential conference finalist last year. They lost out in Game 7 to New York, but Was it New York? Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it was New York. But if you look at it, like we're talking about what Vegas and Calgary doesn't have, Carolina does, right? Like, not only did they have cap space to acquire a Brent Burns, to acquire a Max Pacioretty, they had the prospects to do it. They didn't give up any picks. They had a plethora of prospects. The last World Juniors in December, like they had 10 prospects, right? That's unheard of for a
That's
contending
crazy.
team. Right, that's usually what you see from like an Arizona and
Right.
teams that are actively sucking, right? But what you'll probably see from Chicago as they start to rebuild and
Right.
win game picks, right? So it's really fascinating to see like the amount of teams that we see now in the NHL that are just sort of stuck in this denying their reality. And now I can't necessarily say that Vegas isn't a contender, and same with Calgary, they definitely are. But the contracts they've signed are going to really hurt them. And yes, the cap is eventually going to go up in the future, right? Like unless another pandemic hits, right? But like, it's going to cost money and picks and assets that these teams don't necessarily have to move off these longer term contracts of these players, right? Because you can't just stick all these players on LTIR. Like they're going to want to keep playing, right? So it's really interesting to see what's going to happen in the future with these teams because it could either go okay or it could go really badly for them.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And like Vegas, we've already talked about this in previous episodes. Vegas doesn't even seem necessarily with their goaltending and their team right now. Like, sure, they're trying to be a contender, and I think they're a little bit in denial of where they are right now with like the contracts, the long-term contracts they've signed, and some of the issues they've had. But like, I don't look at Vegas and think they are easily going to make a playoff spot like they have in the past. Like you used to look at Vegas and be like, "Oh, Vegas was the team that you're scared to go into because you know they're gonna pummel you in their arena." And now I'm not sure. Like I just don't feel that same way. I don't look at Vegas and be like, "Yep, they're gonna be top 3." Like it doesn't. I don't feel like that. I feel like they're gonna squeeze into the playoffs this year. It's gonna be in a 3rd spot or a wild card spot, and it's hard because Calgary and Edmonton, I think, are both going to have good seasons this year. I think they're both going to be strong, so they're definitely touted to be probably in the top 3. So yeah, that definitely makes it even harder for Vegas to sit in either that number 3 spot or even in that wild card spot, because I think we have a lot of teams that can push up in that wild card. You think about LA, you think about Anaheim, that are possible teams that can push up and get that wild card spot.
Sure, yeah. Vancouver as well.
And Vancouver and Anaheim has had some good success against Vegas the last few years, to be honest. Like I watch all the games, right? And like
California teams, eh?
The California teams, like they have a good rivalry with Vegas and especially Anaheim. Like and they tend to come in with a lot of strength against Vegas. I guess it's just one of those things by the numbers. Like they just have a good balance that helps them. They have the right things that Vegas lacks, and they kind of go in and they make Vegas struggle in those areas. So I think that it's gonna be one of those things where if Vegas doesn't move forward this year, if they don't make the playoffs, forget it. You're right. George McPhee's fired. Kelly McCrimmon's fired. Bruce Cassidy may even be fired because they may just want to do a whole new team.
I don't think you sign him to a 4-year contract if you're gonna let him go. And
I agree with that.
And again, I think you can't blame Bruce Cassidy for the team because he literally just got hired in the summer, right? So I think you can absolutely lay it down on the feet of
Bruce for sure
and Kelly McCrimmon and have a reasonable grounds to fire them.
I agree. But I think it all just comes down to like how both Bill Foley's going to be, and he can be he can make some interesting decisions. But I think he's one that does get a little involved, like we've talked about before, and that might not be a good thing in this situation. So we'll see how it goes over the next few months. Like if they come out in the first 20-25 games and they have a good record and they're doing well, they can have a good season. I really think that if Eichel can play on his game, they can have success because they're going to have one of the best players in the league, probably, right?
Goaltending, though, right? Like you can have, look at Edmonton for all those years, right? Yes, McDavid can drag you, and so far, right? And he did drag them basically to the playoffs last year, right? And to a conference final, I'll give you I'll give you that, and I'm sure Vegas fans would be happy to see their team back in the conference finals. But you got to have goaltending, right? And what happens if one of those goalies get injured, right? We've seen a ton of goalie injuries these past few years. Like, then you have Michael Hutchinson as your backup, which we know his history with Toronto. He's not a dependable guy, right? And then what if the other one gets hurt, right? Like, we've seen multiple teams have, like, Vegas's first year is a very good example. They had Dylan Ferguson as he was there in that draft, the inaugural draft they had. He was their 7th round pick, and he had to be a backup for them that year, right? And Oscar Dance was their start. No, Oscar Dance was hurt. I can't even remember who their starter was, right? So, I mean, I guess that's a bit of an outlier, right? Because that can hurt any team, because any team's goalie depth is questionable. But even look at Vancouver, right? Like, they had to use Spencer Martin, right? Because Demko and Halak, well, COVID was there, but Demko was hurt and Halak was stuck in COVID protocol in the U.S., so they had to have a strong number 3, right? And they're talking a lot about that. Is, I think, you need a strong number 3 to play in your AHL, or you're going to be in trouble. Right, because if your starter goes down, right, you need some good depth.
And that's something I noticed too. Like, Logan Thompson had a great season with Silver Knights. He played really well in the AHL, and he's a strong goaltender. But when he comes up to the NHL, there's holes. He's not ready. He's not developed enough. That's the thing, right?
It's the same thing.
I gotta ask, with the Canucks, I can't remember. Halak is he still signed with the Canucks, or he's not with us anymore? So it's just Spencer Knight's gonna be.
I can't remember where he signed.
I thought he did. I just don't remember where it was.
Neither can I, but no, it'll be Martin and Demko.
Demko and Martin, okay.
If Colin Delia doesn't steal the backup job from Martin, but I think the Canucks are pretty high on Martin. I mean, he showed very well. During his time, I think he played 8 games, and he had a really good showing in those 8 games.
Like, they certainly like him better than DiPietro. I mean,
which he's still with the team.
He's still with the team. That's a
really interesting scenario if DiPietro does come to camp, because they're going to have 3 goalies in Abbotsford, and one guy's got to be sent down to the ECHL. If it's DiPietro, that's not good. So we'll see. I mean, he hasn't been traded yet. I don't like. There could be a lot of movement in late September once camps get going, if guys get injured, right? Because there are still teams that need to move money. Like, it's really interesting that, like, it's very interesting to see. Like, I think there's gonna be a bit more movement coming along, right? Like, there are a few teams that are going to use their LTIR. Like, Vancouver's okay. Like, they can use Smekle Furlan's LTIR to be cap compliant, so they don't have to move any money. But there are still a few teams that do need to move some money. So at some point, the dominoes have to fall, because if they're not cap compliant, they get penalties, right? So maybe that's taking on an LTIR contract. I don't know. But it'll be really interesting to see what kind of happens with the NHL. I did want to briefly touch on, speaking of dysfunction, some other dysfunctional news we're hearing in the professional wrestling world, courtesy of AEW. So for those who haven't really been following, I do want to discuss WWE, but I want to move it to our next episode, because Clash at the Castle is next Saturday, believe it or not, in Cardiff, Wales, and you and I are very excited for that. But I think we'll devote an episode to that, because there's
next week
very, very interesting storylines.
I think I'm very curious to see what happens tomorrow on Raw as well, and how they'll play into leading into Clash.
Yeah, and so I think we'll leave that, but I did want to touch on AEW, because we mentioned it briefly in our last podcast that we're hearing some dysfunction.
Yeah,
we're hearing it basically with Tony Khan, but now we're getting a real wind of what's going on in AEW. I mean, I think something we can see from what happened with Punk and Moxley. Punk shows up out of nowhere, surprises everybody, and then the next week, instead of keeping it for All Out, they had a match, and Moxley completely washed him. And then there was rumors of Punk not being great in the dressing room. He's causing dysfunction. He calls out, I think we discussed it already, he calls out Hangman Page. I mean, he wasn't even in the building. And then this week we're hearing more and more about just there was Thunder Rosa, where this was actually, I don't fully believe some of the rumors, but like they were saying it went as far as she was so scared of one of the wrestlers she was hiding in the bathroom, which I don't fully believe.
I don't believe that. But, yeah.
But like what I do believe is there's enough chatter that things are not going really well in the AEW company.
Yeah.
Whereas it was definitely confirmed they had a huge talent meeting on Wednesday before the taping of Dynamite, and I think they taped Rampage the same night, right? On
Yeah.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
So before the tapings, they had a huge talent meeting. Tony Khan has actually hired some more talent relations people, and he's put some more people between him. So it's not everyone approaching Tony. It's you report to this person, they'll talk to Tony, and then Tony will talk to you if he has any questions or anything like that. So he's still somewhat approachable, but I mean, I think it's recognizing that Tony, like unlike Vince, who had like when he was running the show, like it was just WWE. He didn't have any other business interests. Of course, he was doing WWE related things like signing deals with Saudi Arabia and things like that. But it was all WWE related, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was very invested in WWE. Whereas you got a guy like Tony Khan, who yes, he owns ROH and AEW, but he's also part owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? So he's got some other business interests that he's.
And I think he owns a soccer team in Europe too. So there's a lot of things going on with his life, right?
So he's a very busy guy, right? And like I think even though they're only on twice a week and they only have 2-3 hours of television, like it's like running a wrestling organization is a lot to do, right? So I think that's maybe to me what is sort of leading to some of these issues is that things are sort of slipping because Tony doesn't have time to address everything. You don't want the other side where it was McMahon was micromanaging everything, right?
And it's funny because to your point, like McMahon, he kind of had an open door policy if you think about it, because he was the type, not open door, but he was the type that, the wrestlers did come to him. They had to go to him. They had to go to his door. And sometimes he just didn't answer the door. Sometimes he just wasn't there. He wasn't around and he didn't want to listen to the wrestlers, but he was still that person that he made the final deal. And if there was any confusion or anything, you had to talk to him. Tony's putting a barrier between that. And I understand that because he's got other business ventures and other things going on. But holy man, there's so much rumor, complaint, so many things going on. I know that he put out somewhat of a bit of a threatening memo to WWE. He had somebody reach out to Stephanie,
so sneaky,
or sorry, to Stephanie and Nick Khan, right? And Jericho came out, and he's a very honest and candid person, telling the media that H and Khan and Stephanie were talking to Jericho, and Stephanie and Chris have a very, very, very good relationship for a long time friends. And they want him back. Of course, they want him back. He's done wonderful things in AEW, but he's an integral part of AEW. And I think that was the final straw for Tony. Like, you're coming back and you're trying to get somebody back that wants to stay in AEW. I don't see him leaving until his contract's over. I don't think he would do something like that. But if you look at his contract, for instance, and he's the one who was mainly the tampering problem, not his problem, but he was the one getting tampered. He has a year and a half left on his contract with AEW, which will put him at the end of 2023, and he'll be 53 at the end of his contract, right? So he doesn't have a ton of years left in the tank probably, but I think WWE wants to see him have like his swan song last year in the company, kind of retire as a WWE talent, go to the Hall of Fame, etc., etc. But Chris has a very incredible creative mind, and I think that's another reason why they want him, because I think they want to transition him into a creative role to work with Paul or have him work something
they had Edge do that apparently when he was injured for a little while. They had Edge do some creative work, I was reading. I don't think it was this time, but it's been previous times when they said, why don't you come do some creative work while you're injured. So I can certainly see them. I mean, why wouldn't you have Jericho work for WWE? The guy
he's a business guy too. He's dabbled into acting. He runs his own podcast. He does the whole Jericho cruise every year. He runs his own he has his own band. He's very well organized, and his brain is a business brain, right? So I can see him being in a role like that very well. So why wouldn't they want him back? And I get it. I don't think that they're going as far as going into talking to, you know, other AEW talent. I don't think that's happening. Maybe like Daniel Bryan or like some of the previous ex WWE guys, but I don't see them going in the room talking to you know, Thunder Rosa and you know, Swerve Strickland,
Tony.
Keith Lee, Tony, like things like that. I don't think they're doing any of that, to be honest. And there's a lot of guys on the roster that WWE wouldn't want. They're not gonna want a guy like Ricky Starks or, you know, Danhausen, like things like that, because they're not they don't look the WWE part. They're not huge. They're not big guys. So I definitely do see that. And there's certain talent that they let go because they didn't want them. And I think that's the thing, right? They just weren't fitting in, or they just didn't have a lot of. They had too many people, too many cooks in the kitchen, too many wrestlers trying to do too many things. So I don't know. I think it was mainly just a couple of people they talked to get a vibe of things. But Tony was really, really unhappy about that, and he put out that statement to them. So
I would be too, and I
would
think
be
it's
too.
also Tony putting his foot down and saying, I know you're the bigger company, but you can't push us around, right?" And, we mentioned this last time we talked about AEW. I think they are feeling the pressure now from WWE. I mean, Khan said it himself. Like, he said that the content and product is better in WWE than it has been, right?
Since
and,
Paul took over, yeah.
Yeah, and my hope is that they can work together, right? And just like I said, like I want awesome professional wrestling 5 days a week, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
That'd be awesome, right? Like in different styles, right? Like apparently the Warner Brothers approached AEW and said, tone it down a little bit. Just a little bit. So I thought that was kind of funny, but
and they have a contract with Warner Brothers now. I think Warner Brothers owns.
I think so.
Do they own TNT? I think that's
I
it's
don't
one of them.
know how Warner Brothers, but I'm sure that they're in a significant role that they're telling AEW
Of course.
to tone it down. But I think what's really interesting is that I think why we're seeing this dysfunction a little bit in AEW is that they are a young company. They're only 3 years old. Like, that's still relatively young for a company, right? Especially wrestling. Like, look what Vince did, right? And in his third year when he owned WWF or whatever it was called, I'm sure it wasn't a glorious thing. Like I think he said he was doing commentating. He was doing everything, right?
Yeah,
like,
he was doing ring announcing. He was doing commentating. He was running the business in the back. He was doing so much at the same time, right?
It was very rough, right? And I think what can also sort of breed some of this dysfunction and these backstage squabbles, because like WWE is not any way of like any different in the fact that I'm sure there's lots of wrestlers who hate each other. Wrestlers who did not get along, and they would do their matches in the ring and then they go back and not talk to each other. Like, there's no way that didn't happen in WWE.
Oh, of course. Any sports organization, that's going to happen from time to time.
Like, there's lots of times you hear teammates hate each other, but then they want to cup together, right? So I think, but for me, I think what is unique about AEW is they've always been about, talent putting in their voice, right? And, being a bit more open than what WWE was offering. And that's why folks left WWE to go to AEW, because it was a bit more open. Like, Chris
they had a little more creative control too. Yeah,
like Chris and Tony Storm talked about that, right? Like, they were saying like how approachable Tony Khan was, and how they feel like it's a bit less micromanaging than what we saw in WWE, right? So I think when you have something like that and you're such a young company, and you have Tony Khan, he does have his hands in other things, right? Like, things will slip, right? And dysfunction will happen because you don't really have a proper structure and you're still trying to figure things out. So people will think it should go one way when the other, and when you have all these voices, it can breed to this dysfunction, right? Like, it's just how it's kind of working. So I'm hoping with AEW that with this new structure that Tony's put in, with these different roles and sort of like hierarchy, right, it'll make it a little easier. They also said that Kenny Omega was a bit, he was very passionate in his speech to the talent, and some folks took it as passionate, or some folks took it as him being a bit of a jerk.
It was probably a little rough around the edges of a speech, probably.
Right, but these folks are paid to entertain, right? And like, sometimes you do need to get your head out of your butt, right? And realize that, right? But that's just how AEW has been, right? Like, it's been about, like, you say speak your mind and give ideas and things like that, right? And then sometimes when ideas aren't accepted, that upsets people, right? Because it's like, why is one guy ideas being accepted and mine not, right? So, and again, like, that's the one extreme you're seeing in AEW. The other extreme, obviously, before Vince left, was it was micromanaged to the T, and Vince approved everything, and for the most part, you're probably not going to get your ideas approved, right?
Yeah.
And some folks will get approved, and some still won't, right? So I think it's
and I think
AEW.
I was gonna say, I
growing
think you're gonna have a very similar situation, because I think let's go back to MJF. Okay, he's a great example of we still really don't know what's the truth to his pipe bomb and what's not. But one thing he did mention was, you know, the way you treat the ex-WWE guys or the higher name guys, you give them creative control. You give them what they want, right? You give the Jerichos what they want. You give the Kenny Omega. Well, he wasn't a ex-WWE guy, but he's a higher name, and you give, Daniel Bryan and Moxley and all these guys a lot of control. And Punk too. Like when Punk first came in, I'm sure he was given a lot of control. And to your point, he probably got to a point where they said no. Finally, it's like telling anyone yes, 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 and then finally you say no, and they're like, "Why are you saying no this time?" And you're probably going to see this a lot with Triple H too, and Paul and Stephanie's regime, because you're already starting to see Triple H is bringing in his guys. It's a different way. Yeah. It's not like he's bringing in top AEW guys, but he's bringing in his guys. He's bringing Dexter Lumis getting a lot of TV time. Ciampa's his guy, stealing wrestlers. Ciampa's one of his guys. A lot of Bayley's faction. These people that he's brought in, they're getting a lot of TV time. So you're gonna see at some point, there's going to be some squabbles, and there's going to be some things where, the wrestler is going to be like, I got time with Vince. I don't have time now. I had time with when it was like look at Omos. He had so much time with Vince. Now the guy's down in freaking. He's not even in NXT. I don't think, isn't he? He's
doing main events.
He's doing main events. Yeah. So like, I'd rather see a guy like that go down on NXT and get some developmental time than be on main events, because nobody pays attention to main events. And now, you have NXT being run by Shawn, right? By Shawn Michaels. So he's gonna have his guys too, and I think that's the struggle. Is you're gonna have things one way and another, and now Tony's starting to put his foot down probably more than he did in the beginning, because he's knowing he needs to. And a guy like Punk, who can go off the rails a little bit. We've seen it in WWE too when he doesn't get his way. Tony put his foot down, and it was clear to me that Punk is really highly regarded by the fans. Fans love him, and they were really excited to see him come back after that long hiatus and come into AEW. He became champion after maybe 6 months of being there, which is great. And then he gets injured, and then he starts not getting things his way. And Tony really put his foot down by burying him. And you can't put it any other way than he was buried. And that was a point to be made by Tony, because like you're not CM Punk and come in and lose in what he lost in like a few minutes, right?
Like 3 to 5 minutes.
3 to 5 minutes. And you're not Punk come in and do a 3 to 5 minute match. Injured or not, you're not going to do it. And I think that's a credibility thing. And for him, like, that was a squash. That was Tony putting his foot down, I think. And I don't know, you said something like they're still right now, scheduled like, for
folks like Dave Meltzer and other for the most part. I'm still figuring out who the
Dave Meltzer's really reliable.
Yeah. They're still saying that it's Punk versus Moxley at All Out on September 4th.
So what direction you go there at that point?
I don't know. I guess we'll have to see in the next 2 weeks, right? We have Rampage Dynamite coming up on Wednesday. So we'll have to see, right? Maybe he comes back. I'm not really too sure. But yeah, I think it just to wrap this up. Like, I think really it is, we're seeing AEW's growing pains, right? Like the
honeymoon phase is over.
Yeah, like we're not old enough to know what it was like when Vince took over, right? Right, and he had a monumental task of taking all of those multiple different wrestling companies and merging them into one, essentially, right? Like he basically merged North American wrestling into one brand, right? Which is I mean, a monumental thing, and I'm sure there was like numerous amounts of missteps and squabbles
for sure
when that happens, right? So so I think we live in the area of social media, right? So this stuff's going to get out. We're going to see it right in front of our faces. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how they bounce back and how they do it, because like I'm definitely an advocate of AEW and WWE coexisting. I don't want
agree.
WWE's not going to crumble, but like I don't want AEW to crumble. I want that to stay, right? Like I want them to figure it out. I want them to have, because I want to watch. Like I want Monday. I want a bunch of banger of of matches that I want to watch. Wednesday I want to see some bangers, and then Friday I want to see. Then because now it's next weekend we have Clash on Saturday, and then we get All Out the
on
next
Sunday.
day, right? So like that's what I want, right? Like. It's just constant enjoyment of the brand, right? And we haven't seen this type of discrepancy in quite a long since WCW, I imagine, right?
I would say since WCW that we haven't had this good of competition. Yeah.
Right. So I hope it stays that way, right? Like I hope AEW keeps their
momentum, I guess you could say.
Smallerish brand, so that they can sort of do the things differently, right? Than the WWE.
I do hope that they still grow a little too. Like I don't want them to stay as small as they will, and I hope more people get exposure to how talented they are. Like how like people to be able to see people like Kenny Omega and like Will Ospreay and things that you just don't get to see in WWE.
I'm actually dying for WWE to poach Ospreay, but
both of them. I hope it would be great to have both of them.
Because Ospreay was on the last taping and he was incredible, and he's gonna face Omega next week. That's gonna be
this Wednesday, I guess.
Yeah, so it'd be a 5. That's going to be a 5-star for sure.
Absolutely.
So we get to see that. Then we get Clash on the weekend. So, but we'll stop there because we have talked a while here about the variety of different topics. So appreciate everybody for watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe on YouTube and on our audio channels. Please leave a comment on our YouTube channel. And a review on our audio side with a star or written variety. And as I always say, my beautiful bearded friend, thanks so much for chatting with me this week.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody. And we'll catch you the next one.